योगेन चित्तस्य पदेन वाचां मलं शरीरस्य च वैद्यकेन योपाकरोत्तं प्रवरं मुनीनां पतञ्जलिं प्राञ्जलिरानतोऽस्मि आबाहुपुरुषाकारं शङ्खचक्रासिधारिणं सहस्रशिरसं श्वेतं प्रणमामि पतञ्जलिं। गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुः गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुः साक्षात् परब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। हरिः ओम्। So in the previous session we finished our look at the niyamas. So we saw Shaucha Santosha Tapaswadhyayeshwara Pranidhanani Niyamaha, and we saw each of these niyamas as per Vyasa's Bhashya, and we also looked at what Guruji had to say in this regard. So today we start with Sutra 2.33, and as a preamble, just to begin that, Vyasa says, Etesham Yamaniyamanam, and then comes the Sutra, vitarkabādhane pratipakṣabhāvanam. So what does this Sutra mean? It says, when there is a badha of vitarkas, that is when the vitarka hits the practitioner or the yogi, then the yogi is supposed to do pratipakṣabhāvanam. Now what is this vitarka? And Vyasa has already said, Etesham Yamaniyamanam. So the vitarka is in the context of the Yamaniyamas. So then what is this vitarka? Yamaniyama viparitaha himsadayo dashavitarka shabdena tantre paribhashitaha. So it is a paribhashikam padam, technical term. So vitarka is himsa etc., in the sense that all that brings in a contrary position to the Yamaniyamas are known as vitarkas. So since ahimsa is the first yama, himsa, which is the opposite, is a vitarka. So vitarkabādhane, when the yogi is affected or the practitioner is affected by a vitarka, so that is known as a badha. Badha, in some sense, it is an obstacle, but it is also a condition, a hindrance by these vitarkas. And when that happens, here the sutra says, what is to be done? Pratipakṣabhāvanam. Now, pratipakṣam means an opposite stand is to be taken. Opposite stand to what? To the vitarka. So if the vitarka is instigating one to go against a certain yama or a niyama, there is what needs to be done? The bhavanam of the pratipaksha, the bhavanam of the contrary stand needs to be done. Now what is this bhavanam? Now bhavanam is a very interesting term, and we see in several yoga texts. So you will read something like Ruda Akashe Chaturbhujam Paramatmanam Bhavayet. So it says Bhavayet. So here it says Bhavanam. So this is something that is somewhat difficult to translate, because it is not exactly to say imagine. It is not even to say think. So one relatively nice translation I have seen is, it's the term used is creative contemplation. But essentially, bhavanam means the pratyaya or the cognitive imprint or the imprint on the mind, on the chitta, at that point is to be, certain imprint needs to be created, either through thought or through other means. And in this case, there is a creative contemplation or a certain imprint. The chitta is to be filled with what? With the pratipaksha. So that is what is being said. Vitarkabādhane pratipakṣabhāvanam. And this bhavanam term we'll probably encounter or talk about later. But in the lot of the yogic practices text, there is a lot of such bhavayet, bhavanam that comes about, and this is something to be closely understood in the context of those particular lines where it comes. Now, this sutra may sound very simple, where it says, "Oh, if you have a contrary thought to yamas and niyamas, you bring in the opposing stand, and then everything is okay." Right? So then you would think, okay, this seems like a very worldly, very simple thing to do. Right? So, for example, if you feel like, if you are on a diet, if you feel like eating, then you bring the opposite stand, and okay, eating is not good for you, so let me not eat. So it sounds simple from the sutra, but there is a certain depth to it, which we will see both in the commentary of this sutra and also the next sutra which follows, because in the next sutra, where really in detail we look at what is pratipakṣabhāvanam. Okay.
So the yama niyamas were mentioned. And these yama niyamas, one thing is important to understand, that these can be practiced as norms. That one might opt to practice yama niyamas as norms, good practices, ideal practices, and therefore they might be taken up. Sometimes these might be taken up as a part of discipline. That one decides to be disciplined in life, and therefore, for the sake of discipline, yama niyamas might be embraced. One might take these as a form of exercising one's own mind, psyche, consciousness, body, to practice in these, because to practice these intently, diligently, it will be a kind of exercise, because we have opposite tendencies. We easily reel into opposites of yamas and opposites of niyamas. And therefore, one might take it as a practice of discipline, that I want to be disciplined, or I want to exercise my whole existence, and therefore I embrace to ahimsadi yamas and shauchadi niyamas. So it might be a form of discipline, it might be a form of exercise, it might be taken up as idealistic practices called adarshavada, because these are good norms. These are definitely good norms. Nobody would object about it. Nobody would have second opinion about it. So one might embrace them as norms, ideals. So we have to understand what are the probabilities with which yama niyamas might be embraced, or might be practiced, or might be imbibed and inculcated and executed. But it should be noted here that what is being commenced textually is anušthanam. Yoganga anušthanad. So this is anušthanam. And therefore it's a different track to be trading on the path of Ashtanga Yoga. So yama, niyama, asana, pranayam, pratyahara, dhyana, dhyan, samadhi, etc. The yogic practices, Ashtanga Yoga, on the track of Anusthana will have one kind of ethos, culture, process, pros and cons. While the same practices are taken up as a form of exercise to body, mind, psyche, consciousness, the same Ashtangas will have different kind of culture and a different kind of purpose and dynamics. Dynamics means the drive, motive, motion, execution, purpose. So there will be different dynamics to embrace to these yama niyamas as ideal practices, norms, knowing that these are very good practices for mankind, and these are praiseworthy practices. But here, textually, it has come as anusthana. And if it has come as anusthana, it implies that we must try other channels before anušthanam. Because one will not be naturally inclined to straight away go into anusthana. So all kinds of practices are handled in the path of yoga. It will have exercising mode. It will have kind of idealistic mode. So all those things have to be understood in practical application of Ashtanga Yoga, and one embracing Ashtanga Yoga practically. But here it is Anusthana. This must be borne in mind. Therefore, Yama Niyamas become Vratas. Now, Vratas don't have exact word in any other language. They are only there in vernaculars and in Sanskrit. Loosely, it is rendered as a religious vow. Vow taken for religious purpose. Otherwise, vows can be taken for various purposes. Even in case of discipline, you can take vows and be in disciplined path. So these are vows. Now, vitarkabādhane, as you just now heard from Srineet, as to what these vitarkabādhanas are. Now, this vitarkabādhana can come in every channel of our execution of Ashtanga Yoga or adaptation of Ashtanga Yoga. So we will counter vitarkabādhanas, which are contraries. We decide to practice ahimsa, but then there are contraries coming up. Now, here, when it is vrata, and again in vrata, for a neophyte to a very matured and high hierarchy practitioner, the vratas have different intensity. What is it that I am meaning here? See, if the child is told to practice truth, what is the radius of practicing the truth for a child? The child has limited range of business of life, business activity of life. It has limited social operative radius, and therefore, what will be practicing truth for a child? But then, what is practicing truth for one who has come to age, a teenager, a young man, an adult? So these are all different kinds of parameters to be practicing ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, aparigraha, shaucha, santocha, tapasvadhyaya, ishvara pranidhana, etc. So we should know where are we, and therefore, what are the limits laid by Yama Niyamas in our practices has to be understood. Therein, we will see that we have contraries coming up. The vitarkabādhana means a kind of fever of the nature of opposites. While you are in practice of ahimsa, while you have embraced ahimsa, you will come across practically that you get fever of himsa. So it comes quite spontaneously, naturally, organically from within oneself to be facing the violation of ahimsa principle. So it's a fever. When you have decided to practice ahimsa and when you feel that you are getting a kind of motivation from within or inclination from within or impulse from within to be practicing the opposite. So that is the kind of vitarkabādhana. It is not an obstacle. Somebody can place an obstacle for you. But this is, the vitarkabādhana is something that comes from within in the form of fever. So there will be himsa fever. When generally you are in ahimsa, you will get a fever of himsa. Because of conditions, situations, and this will be explained in the next sutra, why you get the vitarkabādhana, why do you get fever. So, when I say fever, it is not the fever in clinical pathology. It is of the body. It is not fever of the body. That you get temperatures 100 degrees, 100 F and 101 F and 101 F, 102 F, etc. It's not Fahrenheit. So it's the vitarkabādhana, it's the kind of fever. And that comes from within. And then how it has to be countered, that there is pratipakṣabhāvanam. Now, just now Srineet told you about this bhavana, which is very difficult word to translate. Here you should understand, in vrata, it is a bhavana to be in ahimsa. It is a bhavana to be in satya, asteya, brahmacharya, shaucha, santosha, etc. It's a bhavana. That means it is the inner fervor. It is with fervor that somebody is embracing yamas and niyamas. Now, this stage should come rather than it is taken as a discipline or as an exercise for body, mind, psyche, consciousness, etc. So, basically, in vratas, vrata vaikalyas, there is a bhavana. And therefore, when you are getting the fever, you are supposed to have evokement of pratipakṣabhāvanam. And just now you heard that it is not just having contrary thought. When the himsa is bubbling in you, you can't just embark upon japa, ahimsa, 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 and suggest yourself that you must be in ahimsa and give auto kind of counseling. So it's not auto counseling because it is bhavana basically. So it depends upon with what bhavana you have embraced ahimsa, satya, etc. And that will decide what is the pratipakṣabhāvanam. In the sense, if you have decided to take it as a form of exercise or practicing of a norm, these as practices of norms, then it will be a different antidote if in case of the fever coming up. But when it is vrata vaikalya, as is expected in the sutra, because it is anusthana, then it will be a different kind of bhavana. Suppose you have decided to practice yoga as a discipline. You want to be disciplined, and your practice of yoga is seeing that your discipline is taken care of and is augmented and escalated. Then in case there is a violation of it, then there is one kind of measure to be taken, because you have taken yoga as a part of discipline. If you have taken up yoga as a part of some idealistic practices, good norms, convinced that they are good norms, but then you get the contrary, the fevers of the contrary, of the nature of contrary, then you will have to take another kind of antidote. So in case it is vrata vaikalya, it's basically vrata vaikalya has definitely bhavana. You can't say that you are having vrata vaikalya, somvar vrat, gurvar vrat and shanivar vrat without any bhavana. So therefore, pratipakṣabhāvanam, the word has been used. It is so apt term and it's a very technical term. It should not be rendered into any other language, because that will be misleading to whatever extent, slightly misleading to grossly misleading. It is possible. So therefore, we must stick to pratipakṣabhāvanam, the term, and then you will understand how the fever is. Suppose you have started to do something with high priority, and then you may meet an obstacle. What is your reaction? If something has high priority and you have embraced it, but somebody comes as an obstacle, puts an obstacle to you, then what is your reaction? Now your reaction will be different in various cases, even if you have decided to, as a given a high priority. See, a high priority for yoga, but your beloved one is unwell. Then yoga gets violated. What is your reaction? But the neighbor violates your practice. What is your reaction? So our reactions will be different. So pratipakṣabhāvanam will consider all those things. So if you have taken up yoga as a major priority, then it will be violated by in different situations. There are different causes. And then our reaction will be different. So priority is a desire. You have a desire to practice yoga. Now, there is a beautiful word which comes in yoga psychology called daurmanasya. You will have daurmanasya. Daurmanasya will manifest in several ways. That means if your desire is shattered, so understand you are in Yama Niyamas, there is definitely a desire component. You don't do all this without any desire. Some component of desire will be there. In some form or the other, it will be there. Of some magnitude, it will be there. Now, there is a desire shattering in case of violation. So, when your desire is shattered by one who is revered to you, what is your reaction? If your desire is shattered by your alien person, your reaction is different. If your desire is shattered by some trivial thing, your reaction is different. If your desire is shattered by something very important, more important, then your reaction is different. So, similarly here, the badha comes, and the badha comes in a way that your desire is shattered, your intent is shattered, your resolution is shattered, then your reactions will be different. So here it's a wonderful pathology. We have come in saying pathology because we have decided to practice Yama Niyamas. And it is all possible that you will have fevers of himsa, asatya, steya, abrahmacharya, parigraha, ashaucha, asantosha. So these are all kinds of fevers. The opposites of yamas and niyamas should be looked at as fevers. Now, when there is a fever, we always take a step remedy on it. We don't just, we are not just careless about it. We are not careless and heedless about it. The moment you get fever, we definitely take a step. We want to go for some antidotes. We want to go for some cure. We want to do something to overcome the fever. We don't want to remain in fever. So these are all fevers. Now understand how the fever will be. For you and me, where yoga may not be having much priority, it's not a big fever. But somebody on a higher hierarchy, then little violation is a big fever. So the steps have to be taken like medicine, the dosage. There is dosage in medicine. It's not just taking medicine. So when we have the fevers here, we have to take suitable measures of the remedial measures or the antidotes. So therefore, he is commencing to deal with pathology of himsa, asatya, steya, abrahmacharya, parigraha, ashaucha, asantosha, tapabhava, that is florixum nature or a licentiate nature. That's a fever, one who has decided to be in tapas. So swadhyaya, anadhyaya, aswadhyaya, these are fevers. Ishvara pranidhana, anishvara pranidhana, or ishvara apranidhana is a fever. And therefore now this is to be looked at in the perspective that this is something called the medical approach, medical sciences approach. So it considers the disease, the magnitude of disease, the cause of disease, etc., and the dosage, what dosage has to be given. Like there is infant dosage to adult dosage in medicine. So similarly, now this is going to be dealing with pathology because these are all chemical disturbances. Being in himsa, if you are, the himsa is coming up, it's a chemical imbalance. So also asatya or steya. All the opponents of yamas, niyamas are to be considered as fever. When it is fever, you know that something biochemically, that there is a disturbance. Dhatu rasakarana vaishamyam vyadhi is what the definition we have seen on in the first chapter. Dhatu rasakarana vaishamyam. So this is also some vaishamya, imbalance, and that is why we get the fevers. And therefore, so this is a kind of pathology to all fevers or feverish conditions or fevers which come up. So that's the vitarkabādha. So from our hierarchy practices of Ashtanga Yoga to one who is very proficient in Ashtanga Yoga, who has the culture and ethos of Ashtanga Yoga. We don't have ethos of Ashtanga Yoga, but yet you practice Ashtanga Yoga. So this is how it will commence. But somewhere ethos also is churned out. And then there is vitarkabādha. Then it's a different disease. Different magnitude of disease. And therefore, the dosages should correspond to that. So it's a very interesting topic that is coming up. So vitarkabādha, if there is vitarkabādhane pratipakṣabhāvanam. So we have to understand what is vitarkabādha, then what is pratipaksha, and what the bhavanam is a measure that we are going to take. It is not just, you can't just give a auto-counseling. So let's see how the measures are taken. Or it's not just a thought process. Think of ahimsa when the ahimsa is boiling up. It doesn't work like that. And particular level of practices. If the ahimsa is boiling up, you can't just say, oh, ahimsa. It doesn't work like that. So it has to, medicine should be taken to the fever which has come in the form of himsa. When it comes when you are in vrata, it's a different medicine, it's a different dosage. Anyway, it's a very interesting topic that is coming up. So vitarkabādhane pratipakṣabhāvanam. So we must be in a thought that we are not going to translate these words. We must stick to these words, and therefore we should understand the words here. As these are technical terms, so it is better to understand the words rather than translating for convenience and then playing all havoc with a purport. So let's not translate. Vitarkabādha, Srineet just now explained, and then pratipakṣabhāvana. What is it really technically has to be understood. Okay.
So let's look at what Vyasa says on this sutra. So Vyasa begins, Yada asya brahmanasya himsadayo vitarkaha jayeran hanishyami aham apakarinam anratamapi vakshyami. So here Vyasa is essentially taking ahimsa as an example to illustrate the vitarkabādha with respect to ahimsa. And then he goes on to satya and so on. So he says, Yada asya brahmanasya, of this brahmana, this yogi, when the himsadayaha vitarkaha jayeran, when the vitarkas like himsa emerge, come about. Now what are they like? So he gives examples. He says, Hanishyami aham apikarinam. I will cause violence on this villain. This is an example. This villain, let me kill him, let me beat him, let me cause violence. Anratamapi vakshyami. I will speak untruth. Dravyamapi asya svikarishyami. I will take away all his wealth, all his belongings. So, the first one was against ahimsa, vitarka with respect to ahimsa. The second one was vitarka with respect to satya. The third one, dravyamapi asya svikarishyami, is a vitarka with respect to asteya. Because he's saying, I will take away all his wealth and belongings. Dareshu chasya vyavai bhavishyami, parigraheshu chasya swami bhavishyami. So this is okay with his family. I will behave badly. Vyavai means durachari. So with this villain's wife and family, I will show bad conduct. Okay, so this is the vitarka with respect to brahmacharya. Parigraheshu chasya swami bhavishyami. Of all his, whatever he has accumulated, I will become the swami, the lord. So this is again vitarka with respect to aparigraha. So Vyasa is giving somewhat colorful examples of what these vitarkas may look like. Of course, they may come in milder forms, stronger forms, but the point being made is, in some sense, these vitarkas are inevitable every now and then. And then how one has to work through that. So we'll see that in this sutra and the next as well. Evam unmarga pravana vitarka jvarena atidiptena. So in this manner, evam unmarga pravana vitarka jvarena atidiptena. One who is flaming with a fever. Just now, it was explained how this should be seen as a fever. These vitarkas is like a fever, a bad condition. So, unmarga pravana vitarka jvarena. This vitarka which is instigating, which is taking the person in a kumarga, in the wrong path. That kind of a fever which is strongly burning, atidiptena. So, really burning strong fever. Unmarga pravana vitarka jvarena atidiptena. Badhyamanaha. One who is afflicted. Badhyamanaha tat pratipakshan bhavayet. Tat pratipakshan means the corresponding pratipaksha. So that is why it is said tat pratipaksha. Whatever is the fever that has seized that person of the nature of vitarka with respect to the yamas and niyamas, the corresponding pratipaksha, the corresponding opposite concepts, bhavayet, they need to be brought about in the mind, in the chitta. And this bhavanam, the bringing about the pratipaksha, is not a simple thing, because this is where really the shastra background, the jnana, vijnana, all the background that has helped remove the samshaya, chinna samshayaha, and the clarity of thought with respect to the path of yoga, and then the samskaras that lead one organically to the right path. All of that has to be present, because when one is caught by this fever, the samshaya raises its head. The shadrupus come about. So now they have to be countered. Now to counter those, there is a need for a lot of depth. And that is how the Shastras make so many different points. Right? Even in Bhagavad Gita, you see so many different points being made when Krishna is trying to put Arjuna in the right path. So all of that has to be brought about in one's mind, so that builds up the strength to counter the vitarka. And this aspect, and therefore just a surface level reading or understanding of the subject is not sufficient. There has to be a deeper understanding of the jnana vijnana plus an actual inculcation through the anushtanam of the ashtangas of the precepts of yoga, and that having generated the samskaras in the yogi's mind. All of that has to be present so that the pratipaksha can be put forth both rationally, intellectually, but on one hand, and also through samskaras organically from a tendency point of view. All of that has to be brought about in order to counter the vitarka. And that bringing all of that about in the chitta is what is pratipakṣabhāvanam. And therefore he says bādhyamānaha tat pratipakshan bhāvayet. So that is what it means when this particular phrase is used. And therefore there is a need of, even whenever in the yogic text there is a mention of yogic practice, it is often said Vedanta Shravana Sahitam, Guru Upadesha Sahitam. So all of that is, even the Tapasvadhyaya, etc. in the Yamas and Niyamas, there is a very important place that all of them have. And one of that places is to have a strong pratipakṣabhāvanam possible in that person. So there he says, Bādhyamanas tat pratipakshan bhavayet. Now, Ghoreshu samsārangareshu pacyamanena. So here, Vyasa is giving an example of the pratipaksha arising in the person's mind, the person who is following the Yama Niyama Vratas, but who has been afflicted by vitarkas, how the pratipaksha can arise in his mind. It says, Ghoreshu samsarangareshu pacchamanena maya sharanam upagataha sarvabhuta bhayapradhanena yoga dharmaha. So, the pratipaksha that is coming about says, me, who has been being burnt and cooked in this horrible fire of samsara. So the samsara, the prapancha, the world. And we have seen this in the context of dukkhameva sarvam vivekinaha, etc. Where the samsara brings about, even the papa punya cycle and everything, is essentially building up vidya and karmashaya. So in this ghora, which is a very strong, horrid samsara angara, the fires of the samsara, the world, pachamanena, I am being cooked and burnt. And this kind of me, this kind of I, sharanam upagataha, I took sharanagati, which is the English word sometimes it says surrender, but essentially it is I took refuge of the yoga dharma. What kind of yoga dharma? Sharanam upagataha sarva bhuta abhaya pradhanena yoga dharma. So a yoga dharma which is also about here sarva bhuta abhaya pradhanam, which gives abhaya, help one get rid of all fear and all problems for all sarva bhuta, all kinds of beings, that kind of a yoga dharma. Therefore it is said, there is a beautiful line that says, bhavatapena taptanam yogo hi paramaushadam. So the bhavatapa there is this samsara angareshu pacchamanena maya. That refers to the bhavatapa. The very fire, the heat of existence in this world is bhavatapa. So bhavatapena taptanam, one who is afflicted by this bhavatapa, what is the medicine? What is the treatment? Yogo hi paramaushadam. Yoga is the supreme medicine for that. So from that perspective here, Ghoreshu samsarangareshu pacchamanena maya sharanam upagataha sarva bhuta bhaya pradhanena yoga dharmaha. Now, this pratipaksha is still going on in the chitta. Sa khalu aham. Oh, verily this kind of person, me, sa khalu aham, tyaktva vitarkan punastan adadanaha tulyaha shvavritteneti bhavayet. So then, again this is an illustration showing how the pratipaksha can arise. It says, okay, this kind of me, who having burned through the samsara fires, gave that up and took sharanam in the yoga dharma, having given up tyaktva vitarkan, all kinds of vitarka. It is often the term vitarka jala is used. All kinds of things, himsadayaha, that were against the yogic path, I renounced, I gave up. Tyaktva vitarkan, punaha, now again, tan adadanaha, now again I am taking them back. What is this happening to me? This is the kind of thinking there. Adadanaha means grahanam, it refers to. So I am taking that back, something that I had left because of the samsara angara and the torment. I had given up and surrendered and taken refuge in yoga dharma. Those kinds of vitarkas that I had given up, I am taking them back again. So this is shvavrittena tulyaha. So this is similar to the nature of a dog. Okay, iti bhavayet. Again there is a bhavayet, which we need not explain again because we have gone over it. So this is the pratipaksha being built up in the yogi's mind, that I am behaving like a dog. Now in what sense? Yatha shva vantavalehi tatha tyaktasya punara adadana iti. So just like a dog will lick what it has vomited. So the vomiting is a complete rejection by the system of something that is not good for the system, completely thrown out, and then there is complete nausea for it. Nobody likes to go towards it. However, you will find that the dogs may sometimes lick the vomit. So the pratipaksha that is building up is, in yogi's mind is, I am now behaving like that dog. I, who had thrown away, tyaktva vitarkan, thrown away all these vitarkas, having experienced the tapa of the samsara and having taken refuge in yoga dharma, something that I had completely renounced and thrown up. Now again I am going towards it and accepting it. So I am behaving like this dog which will go and lick what it has vomited. So that is the kind of pratipaksha that is building up, emerging. And we will see more about this pratipaksha and the context I drew towards the necessity of the background of the Shastra, both intellectually and in the samskara perspective. We'll see in the next sutra. But here, essentially, first, there is a kind of a revulsion that builds up in the mind of the person, saying, how can I, who I am of this nature, how can I behave like this dog which will lick its own vomit? So, yatha shva vantavalehi tatha tyaktasya punaradadana iti. Evamadi. So now Vyasa says, having given this kind of a strong, picturesque kind of a description, which will create an impression in the minds of the reader or the listener. Then Vyasa concludes this particular sutra's bhashya by saying, Evamadi sutrantareshvapi yojyam. So this kind of pratipaksham is to be applied sutrantareshu api, in the context of the sutra with respect to yama, niyama and the others. All the precepts of yoga, wherever there is a vitarka, Vyasa is saying, I have given an example of himsa, etc. A similar thing has to be applied everywhere else whenever the vitarka arises. So that with this we cover Vyasa's bhashya on this sutra.
So Vyasa comments his bhashya, Yada asya brahmanasya himsadaya vitarka jayaran. That means he has used the word brahmana. It is not reference to a caste, because that's how a common man or layman will take the meaning. Brahmana here is referred to a person who is supathagami, who is on a noble path. One who is on noble path is also termed as Brahmana in the literatures, Sanskrit literature. It's not referring to a caste. So that means basically yoga would commence when you are supathagami, that you are on a noble path. You may commence yoga anytime, and we do commence yoga anytime. It's not that we come on noble path and then take to yoga. We first take to yoga, and maybe at some stage we might look at the path, whether it is supathagami or unmarga pravana, whether it is unmarga or sanmarga. This will dawn later. So one interesting point to be noted is, we may commence yoga, but when will yoga commence? We should not be under that illusion that when we commence yoga, yoga commences for us. No. We may commence yoga. We may commence yoga, and today we want to encourage children to take up yoga. So, children might take up yoga, and that is perfectly right, ideal, wonderful to be starting yoga. But then, it is important to consider, when will yoga start? So here we must know the jnana vijnana of life, which just now Srineet referred to. The jnana vijnana about life, our life, reality of life, actualities, factualities. What is life has to be understood. A child which is going to commence yoga doesn't really understand, and we don't expect the child to understand actuality, reality and factuality of life, what is real in life, what is fact in the life and what is actual in life. We don't expect the child to understand all this. It is at some later stage that man must understand as to what is reality of life, what is actuality of life and what is factuality of life. So if you understand and if it becomes important for you to know reality, actuality and factuality, the real, actual and facts about life, then that can be said to be jnana vijnana. So it happens at some stage in life. One has to understand the life. Then the yoga will be coming in differently. Yoga also will be pursued differently. The point is, when you start yoga is not when yoga starts for you. You will start yoga, but the yoga will start for you at some different stage when you are little aware of the realities about life. Child might commence yoga, but yoga doesn't commence for child. A young teenager or young person can commence yoga, but yoga doesn't commence for a teenager generally, unless that's a genius person. Someone like Jnaneshwar at the age of 16. He was aware of the actuality, reality, factuality of life. What is life? Was understood by someone like Jnaneshwar at the age of 16 and 17. But generally, at the age of 16 and 17, we don't really, even the life doesn't touch us. We want to go to life and enjoy life, experience life. Life doesn't come to us. We have to go through some certain stages in our life. So, here, Brahmana means Supathagami, who is on the noble path, who wants to be on noble path, who is on noble path, who gives priority to be on the noble path, is called Brahmana. So this Brahmana will sometimes get vitarkabādhane. And you heard how vitarkabādhane would come. So, there, if the Badha comes, it is not just a fever. It is not just a fever. He will realize that these are unmarga pravana conditions. These are pushing me into the path of unscrupulousness. So that is called unmarga pravana. In Vyasa's comment, you get this word. Evam unmarga pravana vitarka jvarena. So this jvara is such. When we get a fever temperature, it's not that we are on bad path or wrong path. Fever comes and it goes. But when it is fever, with regards to yamas and niyamas, they will push us into bad path. They will push us into ignoble path. And then it will be parching us. So one who has decided to be on a noble path, if the bad path touches him or he slips into bad path, it's quite an agony for that person. Because he has opted for noble path. And now by some way, he crosses over or it comes in his way, which is ignoble path, a bad path, vicious path. And then understand that fever, which is quite a different fever. For you to understand as an example, 99 fever is not, we don't bother much about it. But suppose it is 104, then we are alerted. We can't be careless about it. We can't be heedless about it. 99, okay. But 104, we know it is going to be harmful and dangerous. We want to bring that fever down by whatever means, such as keeping some cold water or edicolous water on the forehead, because we want the fever to come down. It is dangerous to have such high fever. It is dangerous for the brain. Anyway, so this is, understand the bada, the fever, how it would be. And it is going to be unmarga. Now that is more heartbreaking for Supathagami Brahmana, who is on the noble path, who is called Brahman, who is on noble path. It is enormous devastation. then understand how he will take antidotes. How he will take antidotes. Say if you are walking on the street and you slip on something and you fall down, you will get up and start walking once again. Make sure that you have not sprained and you have bruised you anywhere, and you will start walking. But suppose you are in Olympic event of running event, and then you slip, you are devastated. If you fall on the street just because you are stepped on a banana skin and you fall, slip, how much does it torment you? But then if you are in participant in Olympic gold medal event and then you fall, are you not devastated? So the Supatagami is devastated by such fevers. You and me will not be bothered about the fevers coming up, vitarkabādhane coming up. But understand, he is like one who is in gold medal event of running, sprint, and then he slips. So, atidipena badhyamanaha tat pratipakshan bhavayet. So your pratipaksha when you fall on the streets is one. You are only bothered about, you're a little ashamed, people might have seen you, etc. You look around, how many people have seen and who has seen you falling, etc. But if you fall in Olympic event, you don't look around who is seeing me and who has seen me, or who might see me or see me. So it's a different kind of pratipakṣabhāvanam. So understand how it is for Supatagami. Now why has he opted for this? Now here we come to the psychodynamics of yama niyamas of yogi and not you and me. We might take a practice of ahimsa, satya, asteya as a norm and knowing that it is good. And then we are advised by people when we are young ones and children, etc. We are advised these ideal practices are good, etc. And therefore we also start practicing. But see, when, as I said, when does yoga start really? Ghoreshu samsara angareshu pacchamanena maya sharanam upagataha. Why did I embrace yoga? So if you embrace yoga for this purpose, then yoga starts. But if you embrace yoga for fitness, health, well-being, wellness, then yoga doesn't start. And most of us in our times are commencing yoga for that purpose. We want to be healthy. We want to face minimum hassles in our health conditions. And that's why we take up yoga. And that's why we say yoga is very good. It's good for health, good for physical well-being and mental well-being, and therefore take up yoga. Yoga doesn't start then. There's such psychodynamics. This is to be understood. This lesson we have to get as students when you are formally learning this subject. Is how you have to understand certain things which are between the lines. They are between the lines for us and they are quite veiled. So we need to unveil them and know them. So basically yoga will start only when ghoreshu samsara angareshu pacchamanena, being steamed up and being cooked by the torment of this world, mundane world, the samsara, the prapancha, being tormented. No child is tormented by family life, yet it starts yoga. Yoga doesn't start. So that's the jnana vijnana of yoga. You should really understand the value of yoga. And then when you are continuing to do it or when you embrace it, then it is one thing. Not having understood what yoga is, which is the case today. None of us understand what yoga is, and we have started already. We have gone a long way in terms of years. 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 25, 30 years. We have not understood what yoga is, but we have commenced. How can we expect the yoga to be commencing when we have no idea of what yoga is? So, wonderful statement here that being parched, being steamed and cooked up, pacchamanena, by angareshu, because these are all like fireballs. The torments of the world should be like fireballs. Then only you will be rightly motivated to be going towards yoga. And therefore, I took recourse to yoga. Sharanam here means to take recourse, as she is clarified. And why? Sarvabhuta abhaya pradhanena yoga dharma. We do our yoga for our wellness, our well-being, our fitness. Whereas Sri Yoga is Sarvabhuta abhaya pradhanena. That is what? That is the noble path. Then it is a noble path. That is the Brahmin in yoga, who is really taking up yoga so that no one is tormented by him, his practices, his presence. Yasmano vijate loko, lokano vijate chaya, Bhagavad Gita. So it doesn't give any udvega, agitation, doesn't parch others, doesn't torment others. Not only others, but sarva bhuta. So understand the psychodynamics of yoga. Real yoga starts then, when you bother about whether am I tormenting all sarva bhuta, and not just my family members, not just people around me, not just the society, limited society around me. It's not just human beings. I must not be tormenting any life. Sarva bhuta means any life. Botanical life to subhuman life to human life to above human life, superhuman life. Therefore, yoga dharma is embraced. And why are we embracing yoga? Therefore, we need to deliberate on the concept yoga dharma. What is really the yoga? And not be in that kind of having a complacency. What I do in real yoga? What is real yoga has to be understood with objective thought process, and Vyasa gives us some kind of eye-opener here. And then, therefore, how pratipakṣabhāvanam will be here? Because this Supatagami Brahmin, one on noble path, in case the fever of antagonizers bubble up, in the form of himsa, usatya, steya, abrahmacharya, parigraha, ashaucha, asantosha, etc., etc. When they boil up, what is his reaction? He ends up in self-admonishment. Rather than we people, we blame others. Because of you, my practice was violated. You are responsible for my violation of practice. Is what we try to find faults outside. But one who is in the path of yoga, he will find faults within and will hold them as culprits. Rather than our human nature to trace some culprit outside, identify some culprit outside, blame something and someone because of this person, because of that, and because of that person, because of this thing and this person, that thing and that person, my yoga was violated. This is how we do it. That's our habit. But here, he himself has embraced yoga dharma. Embracing yoga dharma means vomiting himsa tendency, vomiting asatya tendency, vomiting all those encounter position of yamas and niyamas. They all have been vomited, not just given up. Understand the difference between giving up all these alien forces of yama niyamas or the counter positions of yama niyamas. Giving them up is one thing. Because if you give up, you can take it back, and we often do that. We give up so many things, and we take up as early as it is opportune. But here, he says they were vomited. To understand what is vomit, and just now Srineet explained you. What is vomit? Now, he says, what shame, shock, shame, what a shame. He has self-admonishment. That I have taken back my vomit, like the dog does. he says, this is Shvavrutti. This is Shvavrutti in me. This is like being a dog. I am being a dog that I've taken back my vomit. I vomited himsa, asatya, etc. It was not just given up or just decided not to practice those, not to indulge in himsa, satya, asatya, steya, abrahmacharya. So usually we do that, we mortals on our plane. But this is vomit because he's supatagami. So understand his caliber of practicing yoga. Now when it is violated, see, understand what his reaction. He's ashamed and he is really having self-admonishment in such words. That is his pratipakṣabhāvanam. If our ahimsa is violated by our own tendency, we don't feel ashamed of it so much as this expression here. That means we are not really in the path of yoga. If you miss your practice, the prick should be of such nature. Today we don't feel that prick. Suppose on a day the practice is missed, our yogic practice is missed. It's not a big thing for us. But understand here, supatagami, who knows the jnana vijnana of life and jnana vijnana of yoga, his reactions are different. He is therefore in the vrata of ahimsa, satya, steya. He is not just practicing ahimsa, satya, steya, etc. So that's how self-admonishment. Then he says that the vitarkabādhane will come to even your asana, pranayam, etc., etc. All the yamas and all the niyamas and all other practices of yoga while you are in it. You resolve for some certain things. You decide that I should do this way and that way and this thing and that thing. They all will meet these alien forces. They will all face the fevers. They will get the fevers, and how to counter these fevers is pratipakṣabhāvanam. So wonderful kind of statement of Vyasa. So try to understand what it really might have meant in Vyasa's time to give such a commentary, and what does it mean today to us. It should really mean to us that much or even much more. So it is now slowly trying to introduce to us that yoga is an ethos. Yoga has an ethos. Yoga is not merely a practice. Yoga is not merely a daily routine. Yoga is not merely a daily practice. Yoga is not just merely a discipline. Yoga is not just a norm. Because if we are in a norm, practicing a norm, it is violated. What is the reaction? What is the cost of it? See, here the cost is tremendous. That a Brahmana, one is Supatagamini, has become almost a dog. This is what is his consciousness is, that it pricks him to such an extent. And he says, sure, I have been a dog by doing this, by encouraging and indulging in vitarkabādhane. Naturally, the reformation would be totally different. See, understand how the reformation will be taking place with such kind of reaction to the vitarkabādhane within oneself. Anyway, there is much to look into it. Is what the Sutra and Bhashya is telling us. Okay.
So now, on this sutra, it is also very interesting how Guruji has interpreted it, and there is a lot to learn from it. So he has not taken a general objective look at it and saying that, if there are any contrary thoughts, counter that with the correct thoughts, and that's it. So and in this context, it is good to learn about that. So essentially, firstly, he is saying that the anything that prevents yama and niyama has to be countered with right knowledge and awareness, which we talked about when we said jnana vijnana needs to be known. There has to be a shastra background. When the mind is caught up in dubious ideas and actions, right perception is obstructed. And now, says Guruji, he says the sadhaka has to analyze and investigate the ideas and actions and their opposites. Then he learns to balance his thoughts by repeated experimentation. So now this gives us a very good insight into Guruji's approach, where he is emphasizing balance. And in fact, he uses the term paksha and pratipaksha, which is somewhat unique on how he is taking this. And he is emphasizing balancing the two. And then look at how to balance. He is saying balance by repeated experimentation, right? Which tells us how, as has been said in various classes and so on, how yoga is an exploration and experimentation and a study. And how we see he has applied that in the context of this sutra. So now he says, when you are hit by so-called bad thoughts that go against yama and niyama, you have to investigate the causes and then balance it. And then he says he will explain that in the physical plane to help us understand. And then he says asanas react in their own way, act and react by cultivating health in the physical level, helping the physiology of the organic system so that they function rhythmically, and also affects changes in senses, mind, intellect at the mental level. So now, while practicing the asana, one has to carefully and minutely observe and adjust the position of the muscles, muscle fibers and cells. So here he is applying the paksha and pratipaksha in the aspect of our asana practice by bringing about the concept of balance. He says measure the lightness or heaviness. And here we'll remember his teachings where often he used to say that, in this asana right now, the front thigh is very, very rajasic, whereas the back leg is more sattvic. So can you bring the sattvicness of the back leg into the rajasic thigh of the front leg? This is the kind of teaching he used to use, the words. So this is what he means by the balance here. So he says now you have to adjust harmonically the right and left sides of the body, the front and the back, and learning to interchange or counterbalance the weaker side with, now look, it's as an opposite of weaker side, he doesn't say the stronger side. He says counterbalance the weaker side with the intelligent side, and that brings about the changes in the sadhaka. He grows, he is able to observe equipoise in the body cells and the lobes of the brain, and calmness and sobriety of the mind. And this is how, like we were discussing, this is how the pratipakṣabhāvanam can come about, because of the samskaras coming from this kind of practice, from the entire embodiment, from the body to mind. So he says, thus the qualities of paksha and pratipaksha are attended to. By raising the weak or dull to the level of intelligent or strong, the sadhaka learns compassion in action. And similarly, he touches upon pranayama. Whereas in pranayama, we focus on consciousness on the various vibrations of the nerves with the controlled flow of in-breath and out-breath between the right and left side of the lungs, and also between right and left nostrils. So here essentially, he is again bringing out that aspect of bringing about the balance. So that the right, so essentially all the time there is a paksha and pratipaksha happening because of the inherent tendencies of different aspects of our body embodiment and tendencies, and bringing about that balance builds up the skill of pratipakṣabhāvanam, is what Guruji is trying to say. And he says this adjustment on observation in the practice of yoga fuses paksha and pratipaksha, freeing us from the upheavals of anger and depression, which here there is a direct reference to the vitarkas, upheavals of anger and depression, which are replaced with hope and emotional stability. So this he refers to as the internal measuring and balancing process. And that is why he says the yoga practice actually works. This is the reason why it has the mechanical power to revolutionize our whole being. And this is why asana is not gymnastics, why pranayama is not just deep breathing, and why dhyana is not self-induced trance, why yama is not just morality. So this is what, there is, hopefully with the context of the Yoga Sutras that we have had so far, now we are able to understand and appreciate what Guruji is saying when he says this. Then he gives another interesting example where from paksha and pratipaksha he gives an example of a Ida, Pingala and Sushumna, and we need not go into that detail. But he says, imagine the calf muscle as it is extended in Trikonasana. Initially the outer calf surface may be active or awake on one side, dull on the other, and its absolute center is completely unaware. Then we learn to stretch in such a way to bring the excess energy of one side equally to the other side. And this is an equal and harmonious flow. So I think the thing to notice here is how Guruji is emphasizing balance, because often when you say paksha and pratipaksha, it sounds like there is a polarity, that there is a emphasis on duality, and Guruji channelizes that, negates that, and says it's really about balance. And so therefore he says, learning to maintain clarity and equanimity of intelligence in body, mind, intellect and consciousness is the remedy for uncertain knowledge. So especially when there is vitarkabādha, there is a need for asamshaya. There's a chinna samshaya state, and that is why Guruji is also pointing out uncertain knowledge is a problem, and then there is a remedy. And then he says this blending of paksha and pratipaksha in all aspects of yoga is true yoga. And then he makes that point we saw in his commentary in the previous sutra, where in Yama and Niyama he had said it is about checking oneself to see if the principles of yoga are being followed or not. So here again he says that he would like to emphasize that Yama and Niyama are not only the foundation of yoga, but a reflection of our success or failure at its higher levels. And higher levels he is referring to the further angas. And then he gives an example of a so-called successful god man who is an adept in meditation, but if he carelessly lets himself down in Yama and Niyama, he invalidates his claim to spirituality. So this also brings in the importance of Yama Niyama and the beautiful interpretation and illustration of the pratipakṣabhāvanam in a slightly different way by emphasizing the balance and bringing it to a practical level so that it can be applied by us in our practice of asanas and in pranayama. Okay. So I think we'll stop here for today. We'll continue next time. We'll recite the slokas on Guruji and stop. Vaijñānikam pravaktritva asaneshu kalavidam yogabhyase cha tattvajñam vandeham sundaram gurum yoga vruksho hi lokesmin yat preranena vardhitah yogacharya guru tubhyam sundaraya namo namaha. Thank you.
Namaskar.